Good afternoon. I'm Sean Askham, member of the Simsbury Board of Selectmen, and I'm excited to be joined by my two friends, Nancy Haase, also member of the Simsbury Board of Selectmen, and Rob Heagney, current chairman of the Charter Review Commission, former state rep, former chairman of the Board of Finance, and the list goes on and on. We're very happy to have you here today, Rob. Thank you.
It's good to be with you, Sean.
Absolutely. Today we'd like to talk about the Charter Review Commission process, the changes that have come out of it, and what it means to all of us here in Simsbury. So if you could just kind of tell us about how the commission was convened and that process from there, Rob.
Sure. Our charter provides that on a periodic basis, the Board of Selectmen shall take a look at whether the charter needs to be reviewed, and if it chooses to do so, to put in place a charter revision commission. Mm-hmm. And that commission can be structured as best thought by the Board of Selectmen. In this case, in the present charter revision, which began probably almost 24 months ago, it's very bipartisan. There are 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 2 unaffiliated voters who made up the 8-member panel of the Charter Revision Commission.
Okay.
After being impaneled by the Board of Selectmen, we began our process with a public hearing and had a lot of testimony from the residents of the town. After that, we held about 21 meetings at which we had public audience at every meeting to consider from front to back every provision in the charter. And then at the conclusion of the process, after we'd filed our preliminary report, we had a public hearing to receive public audience and input on that the proposed charter changes. And then we followed that up with a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen to discuss positions that they thought we may want to reconsider. And so it was a very thoughtful process, a very long process. I'm immensely proud of not only the quality of the people that were on the commission, but also how hard they worked and how they dedicated themselves to considering this, the charter itself. So that whole process has come to fruition. We've had a document approved by the Board of Selectmen that will go to the voters this November. And I think from my perspective and the Charter Revision Commission, it's a very good document that they should support.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say there's a lot of specific things that have been changed, and you mentioned that although there were some that were just minor changes here and there, I thought it would be important today to let the voters, as they go to the polls in November, have a little bit more information. One of the main topics of discussion was around the town meeting, because not a lot of folks show up to that anymore, and some big decisions and some big money can be spent, and so you guys had some big discussions about that. Can you give us some info?
One of the things that Simsbury did, and one of his Charter Revision Commission, I'm going to say about 10 years ago, was that we went from a pure town meeting format, where the town meeting actually put the budget into effect, and we went from that to a full referendum from the town. We'd hold the town meeting, and then the budget would go to a referendum in the town. And we did that for 10 years, but we left, and I don't want to call it a loophole, but we left some space in there that the Board of Selectmen can enact additional expenditures up to 1% under the charter, and with the support of the Board of Finance. And then there was the town meeting could actually incur expenditures up to 2%. Anything under 2%, whoever showed up at the town meeting, they could increase the budget by up to 2%. And the problem that presented is, as we had gone to the automatic referendum, is that fewer and fewer people attended the town meeting. And we had John O'Neill, who's served this town 25 years on our Board of Education. He's a moderator for the town meetings. And he said, nobody's coming. We get 20 people or less. And if those 20 people decide to spend another 2%, $1.8 million, they can do it.
It's a lot of money.
And the problem is, nobody else in the town would have notice. They just show up, and 20 people decide we're going to spend this money, and it's a done deal without really good debate or discussion. And so what we did is we changed that provision. So we left everything else intact, but we said anything that's 2% is going to go to referendum. The Board of Selectmen retains the up to 1% change. Up to 2% will still have to go to referendum. But if the public wishes to have a public town meeting to increase it 10%, they can do so by petition. And by that, we left in the same authority for the public to come in if they feel that there's an expenditure that needs to be made that's not being addressed in the budget. They can come in, petition to a town meeting. We'll hold the town meeting and have a vote that everyone has notice of. Everyone has a chance to come in and participate in that public hearing, that town meeting, and to express their vote and to know what the issue is going to be when they're going to the meeting. And so we thought that was a very crucial thing. I think John was a big driver on that, and I think we were concerned that people might be seeing it as taking away their town meeting powers, but we really felt we were leaving it in, but making sure everyone had notice in that instance.
So it's fair to say you amended the process. You didn't remove it. You didn't do away with it. You just amended how the process is going
We left
forward.
the authority in, but we made sure that it would only be enacted with fair notice to all the other citizens.
Right.
So.
And 10% of the voting population in Simsbury is far greater than 20 people. So I think even engaging people in that process, there's far more people that have to be in agreement and are being a part of that process, making those types of decisions, or at least facilitating the ability to have that decision made.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the other items you looked at, which I think was probably one of the most hotly testified item from reviewing the notes, being at the meetings myself, was the design review board. Now you looked at you talked to 19 different boards and commissions, including the Board of Selectmen and Planning when I was on there. So we appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk to you guys. But walk us through the changes on design review. I know that.
Well, one of the things that the charter sets out is there are what we call permanent boards and commissions. And then the town has temporary boards, and one of those for the last 20 years has been the Design Review Board.
Right.
And so they have been subject to every 2 years, the new Board of Selectmen determine whether they want to continue them.
Right.
And so the first point that's important was we believed as a commission that this was an important group, that they were serving the town well, but they should be made permanent.
Right.
And so we start with that thought, and I think a lot of confusion. People need to understand that we were making them a permanent board because of the service and quality that they presented to the town. So that's kind of the first part.
And in fact, a lot of the testimony was in favor of that, if I
Absolutely.
remember correctly.
Absolutely.
Folks were very much in favor of that.
What presented itself as somewhat of a challenge for the commission was, this is a board who does one thing, and it advises the zoning commission on applications it receives. The second thing it does, on every 10 years, they help advise the planning commission on plan of development review. Okay, but their main function clearly is the work they do with the zoning commission. And so the question became, well, if they're essentially a subcommittee advising the zoning commission, should they not be appointed by that board? Right. And there was strong views that that's the way it should be, and that what the skill set for the people on that commission should be determined by the zoning commission, because that's who they effectively serve. I mean, obviously they're a town board; they serve the entire town, but the process is such that the only people who really see the value of what they're presenting is the zoning commission. And if there's going to be input into the makeup and skill sets, that was where it should be made. And so there was some discussion about that, because obviously in the prior existing rules there had been a makeup that had been predetermined. And I fully suspect it'll be the same makeup that the zoning commission adopts, because it's well thought out. But we thought, and the majority felt, that it was something that should be appointed by the zoning commission. Now, we need to understand politically in this town, whether it goes to the Board of Selectmen or goes to the zoning commission, they're acting on appointments coming from the two town parties. So they're either Democrats or Republicans, put up the names for these members, some of which are unaffiliated. Right. And so there's, that same process will feed names. I suspect in the near future it's going to be the same names, and that the process will continue. But it will open, we felt, a good dialogue between the zoning commission and the Design Review Board, and how they operate, and to make it as effective and smooth as possible. And we thought that was a valuable process to come together.
Absolutely.
And we did have, at least one existing, one past zoning commission members who felt very strongly on that issue.
Absolutely.
So.
And a lot of the debate that we heard, a lot of the testimony we heard at our public audience was around acknowledging and preserving what this commission had done for the last 20 years and making it last for the next 20 years and beyond. And I think that was important. So that's why I ultimately supported it, because I think that the intent here is to do just that.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, I was on the planning commission more years ago than I want to acknowledge when we created the ERB. So well, it's 20 years, over 20 years ago. So. And I saw what they brought to the table early on in their process, and they've continued to do that for 20 years. And it's been a board that's been extremely stable. A lot of the members have served for that whole period of time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we think it's a great group of people that have served the town well. We left the same essential number. We had 6 permanent members and 4 alternates, so they have 10 members, and they're advisory. So it's not a matter of how, you know, you have 10 people. They all participate, and they're passing on recommendations to the zoning commission.
Absolutely. So. Okay.
Sean mentioned we all, you know, came in, boards and commissions, and discussed a lot of things with you and the review committee. The first selectman came in specifically and asked you all to consider a personnel director, and I think basically pointing to the fact that the complexity of sort of the human resource mechanism of running the town was something that needed some real professional guidance. And so that was one of the recommendations. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and one of the things that maybe many of our residents would be surprised is that our charter actually mandates that the first selectman is the personnel director. Right. And as such, creates somewhat of an awkward dynamic, because a lot of personnel functions are rudimentary in nature and really need more of a person that's technical doing it. And so there has been the process going on for many, many years where, you know, a town employee was identified to do that technical part of the job. And yet, if you looked at the charter, well, it's the board of the first select person's sole responsibility. So listening to the testimony that came in and raising this particular concern, we felt that it was appropriate to allow the first selectman, if it was his or her choice, to recommend the personnel director be a separate person be appointed, and that be approved by the Board of Selectmen, so that a first selectman, if they want to hold the role themselves, can do so, or they can identify a town employee and have that town employee be responsible for the role with the approval of the rest of the Board of Selectmen. So I think that process will basically give a blessing to what's been going on for a long time, in that we've had actual personnel individuals in the town, and yet we had this conflict in the language of the charter in terms of who was responsible. Now, obviously, other language in the charter leaves the first selectman responsible for the significant decisions that have to be made with regard to personnel, and you know, there was never a request to change that, so that's left intact.
Good. Excellent. Finance and taxation came up, and you folks heard a lot of testimony, not only about budget timelines, dates, but also making sure that the Board of Finance was able to be involved in the processes and the decisions they needed to be involved in to be the financial stewards of the town. So,
well, and essentially this particular section that changes a lot of the timelines for the presentation of the budget. We looked at very carefully. They'd been looked at by prior charter commissions. We had a new finance director coming into the town. She'd had experience in another community. And when we really sat down and looked at the times, that things had to be presented. And the information you needed to present that it was a very difficult task. In other words, the data became available, you know, from the end of the year, you know, maybe at the end of January. Well, then you had, by I think the second week of February, you had to present a new budget based on that data.
Yep.
It's a very, very complex task to be done in a very short time. And obviously, we didn't think that was serving anyone, because by expanding those timelines, and we did it in conjunction with the Board of Selectmen and the First Selectman and the Board of Finance to make sure everyone was comfortable, as well as the Board of Education, of course. We simply gave a rational period of time to see that those things are prepared properly and thoughtfully.
right.
It doesn't change. We didn't move out the town meeting or the referendum or any of that other process that has to take place. Left everything intact, made sure we had time for the Board of Finance to have its public hearing on the budget, which is probably now going to replace the town meeting as the focal point of discussions about the budget, and left, of course, the referendum date intact. So all in all, that was, I consider it more of a technical change, mm-hmm. but it took a lot of consideration, and I think we went through a number of drafts, even when we were relying on the town staff for their guidance in terms of making sure we complied with all these sections in the charter and the statutes, so that it all flowed properly and we met every deadline possible, and yet gave the time needed to put it together.
Right. That's kind of an important one.
Yes.
And budget season's going to be before
having gone through the budget season
Yeah.
not too long ago, it is a rapid process there. It is a lot of input. So the appropriate flexibility within their 4 town staff to make sure that we get the data we need to make the right decisions is definitely something that's critical.
Yeah.
So.
And the other thing I know that there was a lot of discussion about was around the pension funding and making sure that was, adequately being watched. And I think some of the discussion we had was, you're hearing across the country communities going bankrupt because mostly due to pension and some healthcare funding. And of course, Board of Finance has done an outstanding job for years making sure that we're doing well in that regard, but we need a mechanism to have that within the charter.
Well, one of the very interesting parts in this discussion is, we have 3 entities in town that essentially have a functional role with regard to the pensions in the town. So you have the Board of Education with its non-teacher population. Then you have the Board of Selectmen with its all of its employees, and then you have the Board of Finance. And under the existing charter, as it has always existed, the Board of Finance has the final say on the totality of the budget and essentially anything that's in it. But what it never addressed was the question of, well, who is responsible to see that the pensions are properly funded? And that question, I think in sort of the old New England sense, was, well, of course, who would ever underfund the pension? I mean,
right.
I can remember, going back to Rush Shaw's time, it's like, well, that would just be unthinkable. But as we exist today, we see a lot of towns and cities and counties and states who have simply not kept up with their obligations. And the problem is, it's a problem that compounds, because when you don't put in enough money, obviously it's not earning enough interest, it's not building sufficiently, and so the problem goes from being, well, okay, you missed 1 year, to being a compounded loss of interest, and it just gets worse and worse. And you do it a few years, and you have a huge problem.
Big problem.
And that's what's happened. Not only over-promising of pensions, but also, and so. We talked at length with the town attorney and said, well, whose responsibility is this now? And he said, well, it's essentially the Board of Finance's responsibility with input from the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education. And so we put a clear provision in that the Board of Finance will be responsible and will be a fiduciary with regard to those pension funds. It will be their duty to ensure that there's a proper amount of money in there, and that they're to focus on that. And they must consult with the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen in determining what's appropriate.
Right.
Now, the thing that also was very important, and John O'Neill was very key in this, having sat on the Board of Ed side, is you're negotiating, both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education are negotiating wages, salaries, and pensions. So on the one hand, you might negotiate for a pension amount, but maybe there's an inclination in some cases, which is what's happened in other towns and counties, to not fund the full amount, or to assume one amount is going to grow faster than it otherwise should. This takes away and puts it clearly where the charter already had it, but says to the Board of Finance, you've got to make sure the right amount of money is in there. No one else, we're not going to point fingers at anybody else. It's like, you need to know where the buck stops, and in this case, for pension funding, it's going to stop with the Board of Finance.
So, well, again, it's always been kind of understood, but it's nice to have that clarity, especially as we go into continued uncertain financial times, trying to keep taxes as low as we possibly can. That's something that can really, jeopardize the financial health of not only Simsbury, but, adjoining towns and the state. So that's a good change. Keeping with the Board of Finance, and in keeping with our favorite topic, the October storm,
Yes.
we got to test out the emergency appropriations procedures, and obviously we learned a lot from that storm. We did a disaster drill recently, and we learned a lot from a preparedness standpoint. And I can tell you this town is extremely well prepared. We're very lucky to have the volunteers and the professionals that we have within the fire department, the police department, the ambulance, the volunteers, the visiting nurses, the auxiliary, et cetera, and of course town staff. But from a financial side, I think we learned a few things in terms of what we needed in the time of the storm. So talk about your discussions there.
Well, I mean, compliments to the Board of Selectmen. They were faced with a tremendous challenge. We'd all seen storms come through Simsbury. Many years we lived there, and trees down and wires down. We know that all happens, but who would have thought in October you'd see this outrageous conflagration? I mean, there were streets that were closed and people didn't get out for days. Power was down for weeks, and it was a really difficult thing. And you needed to come up with the money to get this cleaned up.
Right.
And maybe there'll be federal money or state money that would assist you down the line. But in the meantime, you have a problem that has to be taken care of.
Right.
So we looked at it, and one of the things that became clear was the budget allows for 3% as an emergency expenditure fund that the Board of Selectmen with the Board of Finance can authorize the expenditure of. That's a generous amount of money. But if a town has, for whatever reason, tapped into that going into a storm, you may not have 3%. You may have a limited amount of money. And the problem that what was clear was in that October storm, you could not have called a town meeting and you couldn't publish. You couldn't get notice to people.
Yeah.
People didn't have power. They couldn't be aware. So you couldn't hold a fair town meeting to authorize more money. So now you had this huge issue that if more money had been necessary, it could have been a real issue. So what we said is we went from the 3% to 50% of what they call the undesignated fund balance. And the town has a bank account. Call it its savings, for lack of anything, its cash flow funds. That is a fund over and above the amount that's necessary. And usually rating agencies for your bonds want you to see that you have between 7 and 10% as an undesignated fund balance to deal with these kinds of issues.
Right.
So what we said was, okay, you can spend, by authorization of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, up to 50% of that undesignated fund balance to address an emergency. And that expanded the amount of funds that would be available, did so in a reasonable way so that if the town's been prudent and saved money, it would have that pot available to it to address problems. And that almost certainly would take care of the time necessary that if you needed to call a town meeting to authorize more funds if the emergency was that serious.
Absolutely. Okay.
I think this may bring us to the last subject, which is sort of an appropriate wrap-up to this because it talks about when do we start this all over again.
Yes.
That was part of the discussion that you guys had was, there was no real clear definition of it. It seemed like you were, you shared with us that we're a town that reviews the charter probably greater than anyone that ever really does. But
from our research, we couldn't find any town that was holding charter revision commissions anywhere near as constantly as we are. And you might have followed, but there was a bill going through the legislature regarding charter revisions to cause them to be, I think, held every 10 years, but I'm not sure the language, but it was more constant than whatever the statute is now. And the legislature got all excited and said, we don't want no part of that. And we've been holding them essentially almost within 5 years. And one of the things we did as a charter revision commissioner is we said, well, give us the most recent charter revision reports. Well, we got 4 reports, big, thick reports on the charter from all the past charter revision commissions, all their work. And so we looked at it and we said, gee, they went through, I think we had 30 or 40 items. Anything that was brought to our attention by the public or the boards and commissions or staff, because we invited staff in, we put on a list and we went through and voted on each one of those items. Whether we would take it up in depth or was something we didn't think should be considered. But when you looked at that list of 30 or 35 items, 32 of them had been addressed in the prior 2 or 3 charter revisions.
Yeah.
So we were repeating a lot of the same work in many cases. And so as we went through this process, we said, you know, we're holding these very, very often compared to anybody else. But it's important to note that the Board of Selectmen can call a Charter Revision Commission at any time. If they want, now that our commission is completed, if they want to call a new one tomorrow, they can vote,
Right.
affirmatively vote for it, put the Charter Revision staff in, and start the process again. Let's say there was an important issue that came up, they could put a charter in. So what we simply said was we were looking at it every less than 5 years, and now they look at it every 7 years. But it doesn't limit the Board of Selectmen taking it up on an
Right.
earlier basis.
Right.
3 years from now they feel it's necessary, or 3 months from now. They have every right to do so. So we're not limiting that at all. But, so that's.
And that was something we talked about, again, during our deliberations when we looked at this item, because it was an item of concern, you know, to make sure the folks were clear that we were able to review the charter as needed. So there was the 2 safeguards, right? There was the one that the Board of Selectmen by 2/3 majority, which is 4 of us, which is what any motion takes to pass in the Board of Selectmen, to compel for a charter review. And additionally, there's the 10% of the electors in town that can sign a petition to compel the Board of Selectmen to convene a charter review commission. So there's 2 protections in place, and I think that's important for everybody to know as they go to the polls on this item. On all of these items, quite frankly, in November. So,
Yeah, I think that is a very important point, is that even if the Board of Selectmen didn't see that a charter revision was necessary, the public can call for one with simply 10% of the public, the voters signing on. So.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, just from reviewing this, from being involved in the process this time, it's no doubt the amount of work and thoughtfulness that went into this, not only to make sure that the provisions were correct, but that people had adequate opportunity if, you know, they felt that the process broke down, that there's protections for the electors, there's protections for board and commission members. So really appreciate all your work on this, Rob.
Well, thank you very much. And again, I need to repeat that we had a marvelous group of people, very experienced public servants, you know, volunteers to the town, who've been on boards and commissions, brought that experience into the commission, and I think they did a very fine job.
Absolutely.
So we have a big report, too, that you guys put out, and just wanted to let folks know that it's online on the town website. If they go under boards and commissions, they can find the Charter Revision Commission and go under on that page, and the link to the lengthy report is in there. And
yeah, the marked up copy between the 2 charters, a summary report is available, as well as all of our minutes, motions, et cetera, so, and the testimony that we heard.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you for joining me today. Appreciate it. Good to see you as always. Nancy, thank you.
Thank you
for having me, let me join you.
And remember, folks, to get out on November 6th, not only for the presidential election, but also to have your say on the charter, and I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.